So, I just want to give you a little bit of background. I was diagnosed with breast cancer in 1994. I co-founded the Young Survival Coalition. The Young Survival Coalition is a board member organization of the National Breast Cancer Coalition. And the National Breast Cancer Coalition is made up of other grassroots organizations and tens of thousands of people across the country who believe in the mission to end breast cancer. So that being said, when we first began in 1990, they collected a group of stakeholders, scientists, researchers, advocates, and determined that we needed 300 million more to improve women's lives, to try to figure out breast cancer in a good way. They raised that money, and they created the Department of Defense Breast Cancer Research Program. It's a congressionally medical-directed, peer-reviewed program, and it was the first of many that have since come out of the DoD. It's an incredible program, and when we developed that program, we believed strongly that, we've always believed, that patient advocates needed a seat at all decision-making tables. And so we created Project LEAD. Let me try to be smart. Okay, so this is the National Breast Cancer Coalition's homepage. This is where advocates go to figure out how they can become better involved in ending breast cancer. And part of their options are to look at Project LEAD, which is the Leadership Education Advocacy Development Workshop. It's a 5-day intensive program that teaches women how to be, I should say people who've been affected by breast cancer, how to be more involved in having a good qualified seat at the table, having an informed seat at the table. It's a 5-day program, deals with cell biology, epidemiology, genetics, public policy. It teaches people how to read, research, papers and proposals, and mainly teaches them critical thinking. So we've been doing it since 1995. I took the program in 1998. It's evolved over time. Every time the landscape changes, every time we learn something new about breast cancer, Project LEAD changes. The most important thing that Project LEAD does is it gives us it gives us positions at meaningful decision-making tables. And we really, we're all volunteers, so our time is precious. We're not just a check mark. We are, it heartened, I was heartwarmed to hear Brett say that patients are our partners. We've come a long way, baby. When we first started this in 1990, we heard more peer review? You want to be on peer review? To which we said, well, under these circumstances, we're willing to consider you our peers. But it wasn't that. Now it's easier because we have placed advocates who really know what they're doing. They understand the science behind breast cancer, and we have placed them at important decision-making tables. And so we've been really successful with that. We've learned that the critical thinking education is essential, and we always teach people to really question, and continue to question. And if you have a question, it's an important question to ask. And oftentimes when we ask questions, we're greeted with, wow, that's an incredible question that I don't think a scientist would have asked, because they might have felt too stupid to ask the question. But advocates are sort of like, well, I don't really understand this. Can you deliberate further? And so the scientists are often grateful for our voice. So the respect and the partnership is essential. And scientists have really embraced us and included us in their work. And that work is usually from the very beginning of the formulation of their hypothesis, the writing of their proposal, the application for funding. At the Department of Defense, the highest, the most prestigious awards, the largest awards, cannot be granted if you don't have informed advocates sitting at the table. Those advocates cannot be employed by the institution. They have to be separate. They have to be standing on their own. They have to be representing a community. They can't just be speaking from their own personal experience. It is important that they be a survivor, but they have to have, before they can even take project lead, they have to articulate the importance of being able to represent a community and understand that they're now in the business of fighting breast cancer for everyone, not just for themselves. Oftentimes, the NBCC advocate understands that any work we do today doesn't benefit us. We understand the importance of informed consent and patients participating in clinical trials knowing full well that there's probably going to be no benefit to themselves, that it's really about patients that come after them, and that it's about our children, and it's about ending this disease for future generations. We are engaged in many things. Our partnerships we're now engaged in an Artemis project to try to find, so in 2010, NBCC set a deadline to know how to end breast cancer by January 1st, 2020. We're working hard toward that deadline. And one of the strategies in that deadline is gathering scientists and advocates together in the Artemis project to find a vaccine that prevents breast cancer and another way to try to prevent metastasis once a woman has been diagnosed with breast cancer initially. So some of the gaps and barriers are that all along the way we recognize that change is hard, that we have conflicting agendas sometimes, and it's really important to define everybody's roles and make it clear, the advocates that come from NBCC stand firm that our mission is to end breast cancer, and we care about the patients, and profit and costs are less a concern of ours because we have to keep an eye on the mission. We also recognize that not all advocates are created equal, and that the education is really important, that they speak to, in terms of an entire community. It's not easy, it's not a soundbite, 7 minutes. Getting this across to you guys in 7 minutes is really hard.
So, Joy, if you need another minute or two, please just take another couple minutes.
I just wanted to also say that, we're guided by some principles, and one of them is once you think you know the answer, you stop investigating, and sometimes that actually is the biggest barrier to finding the real answer. It's really important that you continue to look and you continue to question. And so, and keeping your eye on patient outcomes and improving mortality. Right now, if we continue at this rate, we know that we're going to improve mortality by about 1.9% per year. And going at that rate, we're going to have hundreds of thousands of people dying of breast cancer. It's not enough. 1.9% per year is just not enough according to the amount of money we're spending on the disease. So we believe strongly that advocates at the table can help everybody stay focused on this, and that's what we try to do. So happy to take questions.
Wonderful. Well done, Joy. Thank you. Thank you for that passionate and great sharing, enlightening presentation. Questions for Joy?
I thought it was a great presentation, first of all. Thank you for giving it. Just a couple questions.
Kevin, you need to identify yourself.
Oh, I apologize. I'm Kevin Fowler, Kidney Health Initiative. Just the cost to do that 5-day program, and then where the funding's coming from, and then how do you make sure that people utilize this training that you invested in? Because that's a pretty big investment there.
So I don't know the answer to that question. I can certainly find out and get it to you guys. The cost question. I know that it is very expensive, and we've had a wide variety of funders over the years. Sometimes, I know the Avon Foundation was funding us for many years. A few pharmaceutical companies have chipped in over the years, although NBCC has rules about how much they can take from any one entity. This year, it's actually, I happen to know that JALBCA in New York is a major funder of Project LEAD. JALBCA is the Judges and Lawyers Breast Cancer Advocacy Organization in New York City. So we get much of our funding from private donors. So. But it has become very, very difficult, and NBCC's taken some difficult positions over the years with regard to different drugs and different therapies, because we keep our eye on the mission, and that makes it harder sometimes for us to get funding.
All right. Any other questions? Mary?
Mary Tobin, Acres.
You may need to be slightly closer.
I'll move it. When you obviously have tons and tons of patients involved in this, what kinds of work have you done in terms of assessing their experience in clinical trials? Is it available in a database? What kinds of things have you done?
So we have many patient advocate volunteers who are happy to contribute their time toward the mission of ending breast cancer, and many of us work in many aspects. We don't have a database online. It's really the people, the staff of NBCC who know us well, who will call us up and say, will you apply to PCORI? Will you sit on the Department of Defense Breast Cancer Research Program peer review? Will you help with the IBRANCE trial? Will you help us bring Herceptin we advocates were at the table with Herceptin. We brought it to market 10 years sooner than it would have been brought to market. And, Denny Sleeman says so. But, that kind of thing. But it's not a database online. It's really about advocates that have a proven track record in understanding the science. We apply in different ways. Every seat has a different application. Did I understand your question correctly, Mary? I'm sorry.
Well, I'm just curious as to, since you have so many patients basically at your fingertips, if you've done any surveying of the ones who've gone through clinical trials, how did they deal with the experience? Was it successful? What worked? What didn't work?
That's actually so. That's a very interesting question. I don't know that we've surveyed our advocates about whether they've been involved in clinical trials. I don't know the answer to that question. The way we actually participate is we help researchers formulate the questions, and we do it from beginning to end. We review the data. We are an equal partner on the research team. Every time there's a research team meeting, the advocate needs to be included. And there have been clinical trial partnerships that we've dropped out of because our partner they were doing things without us knowing. So to us, the important thing is oversight and making sure that the trial is being implemented with the patient's perspective in mind and with the patient's best interest in mind. So it's less about the individual's experience and how they're feeling when they're going through the trial. We want to know that the trial is going to help us to make an impact in women's lives.
Excellent. Cindy and Lynn, then we'll move on to our next stage.
So I have two.
Cindy, you need to.
Sorry, Cindy Grossman, Faster Cures. I have two related questions. One is sort of thinking about your training. How do you all think about? When you talked about the patchwork of different funders throughout the years, I think you're to be commended for that, but it also makes me really nervous about sustainability, and I'm sure it does for you too. So I was just wondering about sustainability and how you all think about kind of taking this to scale, if you've all thought about different models for that. The other piece is whether or not your training you feel is applicable. What pieces of it do you feel applicable potentially across diseases and conditions versus within breast cancer community?
So I'm going to start with the second question first. Critical thinking. Critical thinking is the most important aspect, and representing an entire community. Not speaking from the I, not speaking about my own personal disease, not speaking about my own personal experience. It's about, what do I want for my daughter moving forward? How do I want, because right now I got news for you, the treatment for my daughter is worse than the treatment I had. It's more toxic, it's harsher. So how do we improve lives? That's how I think. That's how the advocates need to think, is how do we make it better for everyone, not just me. The funding issue is, look, I bet if you ask everyone in this room, their biggest challenge is money. It's a common fund, like that's just the biggest barrier. And we always start our scientific meetings by saying, can we all just agree that we need more money? And like that, I don't want to hear that that's your barrier, because let's face it, it's hard, it's difficult, it's a challenge we all have to manage through. NVCC does it, and we change when we don't have money. We figure out how to create the program with less money. When we have it, we figure out how to do better. But I think it's always going to be a challenge to everyone, and if it's the right thing to do, you do it. You figure out how to do it.
Excellent. Lynn? Pardon me? Carlin?
Sorry.
Carlin, then Lynn will get last word.
Sorry, I wanted to respond to that. Carlin Schrader, Parkinson's Foundation. So Joy, thank you so much. MBCC actually provided us insights and input into developing our own patient program. So it's very transferable across disease areas because we provide a very similar training to people with Parkinson's and their care partners. And I can say in terms of cost, we have also had to change and adapt our model year by year depending, but a 3-day training, which we do over a 3-day training for approximately 30 people from across the U.S. who don't have to pay any cost towards it. We pay their transportation, their meals, everything. It's about $80,000.
Wow. Excellent. Thank you, Carlin, for sharing. Lynn, final question. Then we're going to move in to the next section.
Okay. Lynn Hager, AstraZeneca. This is great. Just thinking from a patient partner's perspective, looking at all us in the room and thinking there's breast cancer, coalitions, and there's people being trained there, there's people being trained in Parkinson's, and I'm sure all other diseases as well. How can we get a hold of this? How can we create that database that we can all tap into that, it doesn't matter if you're industry or if you're FDA or whatever, if you need that patient voice, you know where to go. It's like a national database, or is that
There seems to be a
doable?
common theme through the day is this dissemination, and it's very fragmented, and trying to find a way to have common touch points for research, for resources. Seems to be a common theme throughout for the part of the research recommendation. It's taken many flavors throughout the day.
Yeah, that would be great to, pie in the sky.
Not pie in the sky, just a little bit of action, right? An effort. Very good. Joy, thank you so much. You did a great job.